So I'm here today in this wonderful house in South Carolina with my friend Dr. Judy Wood, and I think a lot of people will be interested in seeing this discussion. You might want to call it an interview, you might want to call it a discussion, and I've had some questions which have come from Facebook and from emails, a couple of emails, so I'm going to try and go through some of those. Don't know if we've time to get through them all. And some of the questions that we get repeated, don't we? Quite similar questions, so people can watch the other interviews and so forth to go through some of those. If they don't get their answer today, I'm sorry, they're just going to have to study what's out there.
To read the book.
And read the book, and we'll talk about the book in a minute, just briefly. So, Dr. Judy Wood, for those that don't know her, has become somewhat well known now because of what you saw that many people didn't see on 9/11, and I was one of those people that didn't see, and you did. And so, you know, we've talked. I know you've talked about that in many interviews before, but I think I wanted to just mention how, for example, some of the key things that stood out to me from your description of what happened then, which is that you saw exactly what happened, and you saw through these false stories which were coming out straight away, didn't you? Because you looked at the events and you saw that this building came apart. The buildings were coming apart.
Never saw anything like that before.
And you thought, what the heck is going on? You said you thought it was like a War of the Worlds thing, didn't you? That that was happening, that it was being replayed on all the channels, the same footage, wasn't it? And so you're thinking, is it just me? And then we were talking earlier today, weren't we? And that was, you know, you described how you felt that you were, you know, it was the invasion of the body snatchers, where you were the only one, you were the one that had gone insane, and everyone else was
or the other way around.
Yeah, or the other way around.
And needed to sort out that difference.
Right. And you said, I know you said many times that when your eyes and your ears disagree, you tend to shut out your ears, don't you?
Another thing, they told us it was a collapse, and I remember thinking, now, what does a collapse look like?
Right.
No, it doesn't look like that.
And I remember you saying in the lectures, you know, particularly I think it was the BEM lecture, you said this, you know, collapse, pile, Osama bin Laden, terrorism, those were put out straight away.
Yes.
And so that was what's called, we were talking about this with Matt as well, anchoring. They anchor these concepts into the event, you know, what's happening in front of you, so you associate it with that. And then you stop questioning, and I know you've covered that on some interviews before. So what I also want to talk about is, people might be wondering why I'm here in South Carolina. We're jumping tracks a bit, but you know, it's okay. It's meant to be sort of fairly informal, and because I the reason why I'm in South Carolina is my fault, really, isn't it? Because I told this story to you about what's a couple of years ago now, wasn't it? In that. In 1999, I saw total solar eclipse in Great Britain, in a place called Cornwall, which is on the southwest tip of England. And there's some peculiar things about that, because it was August the 11th, 1999, when this eclipse took place, total solar eclipse. We just saw it, but it was the time of the eclipse then was 11:11 in the morning, which is rather unusual because of what came later in my life.
11 on the 11th.
On the 11th of August, yeah, 1999, which is kind of sort of like an 11 number 2. And so I was thinking one day whilst standing in the shower that I'd known that eclipses go in 18-year cycles. The moon's orbit has an 18-year cycle called the Saros. And I thought, I wonder where there must be a solar leclipse in August or July or June or something. 2017, because that's 18 years after 1999. So I thought, well, let's go and have a look then. So I got dressed, went on the internet, put in 2017 total solar eclipse, and what happened?
I think you contacted me and said, well, you know, go look at this, and I looked at it and went, oh my gosh, it's dead center over my house.
And it was right over your house, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then we had another bizarre thing, because our friends here who've kindly organised this place that we're staying here, this beautiful house near Williamston, And they booked this, you know, with the intent of getting us together, didn't they? And that was part of the plan.
Yeah.
And this is also right in the path, centre line of totality, wasn't it?
Yeah, between over this house and my house.
Yeah, it's like a straight line of totality, isn't it?
Even better yet, the cow pasture out there.
Yeah, and we've got a wonderful view. I'll put some pictures into the video of some of the shots I've taken around here.
It was totally dark now. The cows started mooing and running for the trees.
It was fantastic, wasn't it? Because we were also worried we were going to get clouded out because of some of the clouds that came in. We've got an absolutely perfect view. I'll put some of the pictures that I took into the video, and we really felt absolutely privileged, didn't we, to be here and experience this. And
also, right before the total darkness, all of the gnats come out and mosquitoes and bugs for about a minute, and then when it was totally dark, they went to sleep. And then when the sun starts peeking out the other side, they came back for about one hour of, one minute of dawn in the morning, kind of. Yeah, and then they go away. And also, the birds quit chirping.
And I mean, also what I want to sort of lead into that this story of the eclipse is interlinked with how we came to get to know each other, isn't it? And so I've told that story a number of times, in that you'd started to look, and I've already started telling the story in the first minutes, that you'd started to look at 9/11 pretty much on September the 11th itself, or even the 12th or something.
On the 11th, yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of people have tried to say, I want to clear some of these things up which you and I have spoken about before. Oh, this Dr. Judy, she wrote this book in 2010, and that's when she came on to 9/11 after all these other people had, you know, been saying things and doing books and stuff. That's nonsense, isn't it? Because you were actually posting stuff. I know you were posting stuff in 2004, and that time, that was when you said you felt that nothing was being done. The grown-ups, as you said, weren't going to take care of it.
And somebody needed to.
And somebody needed to. So you took that decision, essentially, and almost literally, to put your life on the line.
Right, and my career was for sure, you know, it was one-way ticket.
Yeah, that essentially sort of came about later, didn't it? And kind of, you know, that didn't go well from there. And then you know, so you're on record really from on the internet, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you started posting stuff on Jane Doe, was it 2004? Yeah. And I know you'd been discussing it privately with a few people for the years before that, hadn't you? And you'd set up this Jane Doe page to just put some pictures on, to share stuff.
I didn't email it.
Right, you didn't know how to email it and stuff. Now I don't know what the state of that site is now. Have you looked at it recently? Is it, you know, we don't know if it's still going or whether that tripod thing has closed down.
But
or whatever.
Also in 2007, early 2007, submitted the request for corrections.
Yeah, we'll come on. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Yeah, but because so the path was you did the Jane Doe site, and then we did this 9/11 Scholars for 9/11 Truth got set up by Fetzer and Jones, didn't it?
Yeah, after that.
Yeah, so that was after the Jane Doe stuff. That was actually about at least.
And after I had met David Ray Griffin.
Yeah, so you told that story. He met you at a conference, didn't he? Was it a conference?
Where he was speaking, and I went there to D.C. It was the 23rd of September, 2005, and I went up to him afterwards and said, you know, we really need to
get some scholars together, didn't you? Get some academics together.
Academics together. Said, you know, safety in numbers. And I gave him my faculty card, and he started tucking away in his pocket. He said, "This made my whole trip worth it."
Right.
Wow, I felt good. He was going to email me as soon as he got back. He didn't email me. Then they set up this Scholars for 9/11 Truth bait.
Right, and so I got involved in December 2005 when Jones
was rounding people up.
Yeah, he was rounding, but exactly, he was rounding people up, and I didn't realise this at the time. I've told this story several times on the interviews that I've done, and so that took us into 2006. They had you basically running in circles once this scholars group got going, and Fetzer had you doing the website and things. And
well, first I emailed Stephen Jones because he was doing this aluminum doesn't glow business. And
Right.
It's so silly. I mean, that's anybody would know that. That's not true. It's a temperature thing, not a material thing. And like, what's wrong with this picture? This doesn't make sense. How could a professional? Is he having a senior moment? I mean, what's going on?
Right.
And then from my email to him, he blocked out some things, and he presented the next day at this meeting, this presentation he was given. He said he didn't disclose who I was, but he
essentially did because.
But he said Jane Doe, and then also he said a female professor
at Clemson.
In mechanical engineering
department at Clemson.
The only female faculty member.
Yeah, I mean, how many of those are there? Let's see,
Right.
one? Yeah. So people could easily work that out.
And immediately my department chair and my dean started getting emails from trolls, nasty stuff, and it was very disruptive.
Yeah.
And that was the intent.
Yeah, that's it. So they wanted to shut you down pretty much
Yeah.
from when they realised you were willing to speak out.
Yeah.
So then you got involved in the scholars group, and then I was involved in the scholars group, and then
There was somebody who was doing the website who blamed me for my student's death, and Fetzer told him to get lost. And Fetzer said, "Now I have no." And finally, I don't know how to do websites, but as a team member,
you were
I'm a
trying to
team
just
player.
help out with the group effort.
I would try to figure out something until you got somebody.
Yeah,
You quit looking.
Exactly.
Because now you have her roped in and have her run around circles.
Because I mean that was a huge tragedy, and it was early 2006. It was March or April that Michael Zabur was killed.
March.
March, wasn't it? And that
March 18th. I think.
Yeah, I mean that was horrible, and some people seem to have forgotten about that, but
it was rather traumatic, and
yes,
to have it
yes.
just shoveled off to the side and ignored. And then I got that call from Morgan Reynolds, who called me because
Okay, so we're going again. So I'll just go back and talk about my affidavit. So I'd spoken to Jerry Leapart, and he'd suggested that I submit an affidavit, or I'd suggested him that, I asked him could I can't remember which way around it was, and because of my involvement with the research and so forth, and I had some knowledge, because at that point, we'd also established the relevance of the Hutchinson effect. And of course, you and I had been speaking to John, over time, hadn't we? You spent some time with him, and you got to know him a little bit. Went to see his lab, didn't you? And you saw the equipment he had up in New Westminster near Vancouver. I'd spoken to him on the phone a couple of times, and I wrote out his affidavit, which is all on your website, isn't it? All the affidavits that we put in are there. So that's all on record, and you've got the court stamps and everything, hasn't it? So that all went into the Southern District of New York over the time period from April 2007, and we were submitting documents. I think, when did the document submission start? So there were various appeals, and then we had, didn't we?
Right. The original submission was in April 2007, and then when the other side starts filing stuff, we can file more stuff. And
that whole process went on until
about
I think
a year.
Yeah, about a year, and then we had the appeal, didn't we?
Yep.
And that was they had a court hearing in June 2009.
Something
was it,
like that, yeah.
And they had an 8-minute hearing.
Yeah, you can't do much in 8 minutes.
No, and that was when they had 11 judges, was it?
3.
Oh, it was 3, okay.
3. There's 3 judges, and
that was when one of them said, "You all have a death wish," or something.
do y'all have a death wish?
Yeah,
As Jerry had heard him say.
Yeah.
And there's 2 people other than me and Jerry, two supporters.
Yes, so
one of them we drove there.
So hardly anybody turned up. I tried to publicise that court case in the 9/11 groups that I was part of, and they wouldn't talk about it.
If we had 1,000 people in the street out front, you would have had something different happening.
Exactly. But they really, the irony of it was that there was a regular news website, albeit not a very well-known one, featured my press release about the court case, whereas the 9/11 Truth Movement website tried to brush it to one side.
Oh, actually, you were banned from the group if you talked about it.
Yes,
There's several people banned from the group.
Yeah, exactly. And we found that out later, going back to the Architects and Engineers group. That's what happened. If they brought up your name, your research, the court case.
Well, I knew about it at the time. There was a couple of people who had contacted me about that.
Right. But this process went on afterwards as well, didn't it? But it was, as you say, it was going on during your court case, and then all the time after that. And as we said earlier, they had guidelines not to admit people to the group that were familiar with your research or mentioned it.
And being there was an ongoing court case, I couldn't advertise, I couldn't talk about it.
No.
And so I could only talk about once the case ended, which was what we then submitted to the Supreme Court. Well, first, the Court of Appeals said, the law applies to this case, but we're ignoring the law in order to dismiss the case.
Exactly.
That was respectful.
Yes, indeed.
And then we went to the Supreme Court, so we can say we did it all. And the Supreme Court doesn't have to hear the case.
Yes.
Only if they feel like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
And they decided they didn't feel like it and announced that. And this is an important thing to note.
Okay.
In the spring of 2010, or February 2010, it was I think it was January 22nd where they announced that they weren't going to hear the case. And early February 2010, Richard Gage, Stephen Jones, and so forth announced a worldwide press conference. And every city, somebody was supposed to rent out a hotel room, a conference center kind of room for a press conference and stand in front of the microphones in case the press had any questions. That limited me from talking about it.
Yes, yeah.
Because it would be shut down immediately. That was amazing, and I bet you most people out there don't realize why they did this thing.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember you mentioning this quite recently to me, even though it's happened, you know, in 2010, which is 7 years ago now. Yeah. And I didn't really appreciate that until you reminded me of that. I don't even remember that. So.
And at that event, Stephen Jones, Richard Gage, David Ray Griffin, and all joined in San Francisco for their group meeting in a hotel. And Stephen Jones had opened his mouth about energy weapons, having done the earthquake in, I think, Haiti.
Right.
And everyone says, oh, he's behind the 8 ball.
Yeah,
and realizing energy weapons exist. But, yeah, it was interesting how easily. And then right at that same time, remember this ABC, never before seen images?
Yes,
Those are all the images that had been on my website all this time.
Yeah, for at least 6 years, well, about 6 years, in fact, at that point.
Now let's look at what would have happened if they hadn't done that. I could have released all these images and started talking about my court case, and the shock and awe would have hit everybody.
Oh, hit more people, certainly.
Yeah, and like, oh my gosh, we haven't seen these before. But the way it was covered was never before seen. Even Fetzer played that game.
Yes.
And so never before seen images. One of those images was on the cover of his 2007
book. I remember you saying that now. His
DVD from the
what's controversial and what's not conference, the Super Muddle Up conference that was done in 2007, which was at least useful for getting your evidence on record with the videos that we did with you.
There's something else I'd like to mention of that. You know, Fetzer likes to say, oh, she hasn't thought about this new evidence we have about the dust samples. I presented at the 2007 Fetzer's conference.
Yes.
Wasn't he paying attention?
Yeah, exactly. He organised a conference and then wasn't paying attention.
Right.
You know,
and later, you know, 3 or 4 years later, he's saying that this is new information that Judy can't handle.
Right. So, you know, after that, it was really when the book sort of started to be an idea, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, I wanted to get the key tank. Remember, you have to be the first.
Yes.
So I first submitted the request for correction. That qualified me to file the key tam case. And then was able to file the key tam case. Okay, well, that was cooking. Then I started working on the book.
Right, okay, so you started the book essentially in around about 2008 then, because you got to the point where you got the evidence into some kind of organisational format, and so you started to build on that and marshal it a bit more and so forth.
Right, organise it better.
Yeah, organise it better.
The website and all was just hurried together.
And I wonder if you want, shall we tell the story about the certain person that got involved sometimes after that? I think it's a time we should tell that story because of what's happened recently. So basically, you'd start to do the book. You were thinking about getting the book published. I know you'd also previously discussed doing it with Morgan, hadn't you? I think you talked about it.
Morgan didn't have that long of attention span. Like when I first put up the first article, he was off in a motorcycle ride, but he's retired.
Yeah,
he's enjoying life. Yeah. And I felt internally a sense of nervousness, like I need to get this out there
now. Yeah.
And I was taught that dead people keep secrets. I need to get my secret out there.
So essentially, you were working with Morgan, and felt that would only take you both so far at that point.
Right.
And so you felt you had to go further from there under your own steam and so forth, and in your own time and so forth.
And then I started putting it all together. And okay, but I have no idea who would publish such a book, how to find a publisher, and how to go about this.
And I, of course, was doing stuff as well. I'd started to put together. Well, I'd done all the articles, the Greg Jenkins article on New 9/11 hijackers. and I've done one about Jones and that thing in 2007. So I'd essentially been doing something similar to you in one sense. You were looking at getting all the evidence organised for the destruction of the World Trade Center, physical evidence, scientific forensic evidence. And I was looking at getting all the evidence about the cover-up and how that was working. I was looking at getting that all
and also,
together.
let's mention Russ Gerst. He played a big part
Absolutely,
in this too.
he does, and he still does to this day.
Yes,
Russ,
very. I wouldn't be able to do
yeah,
what
and I mean, the
without
fact,
him.
if it wasn't for Russ, but you know, the book would probably be, it might be available, but it wouldn't be.
It would be
He's
very
organised it so well, hasn't he? You know,
of how to do it,
yeah,
and when to reorder new ones, and
yeah. I mean, he's essentially been a publishing company all by himself, really, hasn't he? In essence,
it's God's gift.
You know,
to us.
yeah, absolutely. And he's sorted out all the Amazon stuff and everything. So we should absolutely give him a big shout out.
How I first got a hold of him, that was back in 2006. There was a friend that I had who'd also been communicating with him, and he had written a letter to the editor in his local newspaper about thermite. And this friend of mine had sent it to me to proofread. I went, wait a minute, hold the horses. And then I noticed there's a phone number down there, and I called it up. And Russ answered, and I told him, and he said later he realized, wait a minute, I need to think for myself.
Yes.
Is it thermite, or is this person who's telling me thermite is bogus? And he thought it out and sorted it out himself.
And that, of course, later on we can just throw in here that led to some dialogue with Jeff Tecklenburg, didn't it? The guy
at the paper.
Was that the same guy?
Yeah, the newspaper guy.
Yeah, and he did run some articles, didn't he? And he's one of the few people that's actually tried to do something with the evidence that you put together. And I think Russ had written an article about where did the towers go. I can't remember. It's going back a few years now, isn't it? Because, I mean, this is it. We're going back to some things which are 10 years old now, aren't we, and older.
Very few people are aware of, too.
And so we're still, you know, this is looking back in history for us as well. And we're now approaching the 16th anniversary of the events. So, you know, it's...
and Russ wasn't sure how to... I was wanting to do the book with Russ, and he wasn't sure where to go.
No, and I wasn't either.
Yeah,
I mean,
and who do you go to publish such a thing?
And we talked about this, and a name came up, didn't we? Because I'd been listening to people like Richard Hoagland.
Well, I ran into something, and then I mentioned this name to you, and I went ahead and wrote to this person. They wrote back and wanted to have me communicate with Richard Hoagland. And you had then sent that audio clip about that Richard Hoagland was talking about.
That's right. Richard Hoagland was basically doing the Bin Laden story on George Nouri, and that was
about solar energy. We have the sun.
And we have the sun. You know, we don't need Bin Laden's oil. You know, so
9/11 was for nothing.
9/11, was for nothing. You know, and he was associated with another person, and who'd written various books, which we later found out are essentially a fair bit of storytelling, really. There's some interesting sort of stuff in there, and I'm still interested in a lot of the stuff that he writes about and those topics. But essentially, you know, we found him to be untrustworthy, didn't we, because of what he started to do. I mean, we're not going to go into all the details, but basically the process was you wanted to get the book published. You'd pretty much got everything you needed together, hadn't you? You needed editing, didn't you? Well, did it need editing? You know,
right.
I mean,
I needed somebody to tell you, like, who can publish a book and how do you go about that?
Right.
And I wouldn't hurt to have somebody look it over, but I contacted this person because they've written sort of like hypothetical scenarios about different things, and I knew they could handle this.
And this character is Joseph P. Farrell, who's written various books. And the peculiar thing was, and we agreed that we would tell this story now. I wrote a little bit about this in the Richard Hoagland, Is Richard Hoagland on a Dark Mission? People can read that article on my website, which was written in 2011 or maybe even before. I can't remember the date of it, and I haven't got it to hand. And Hoagland and Farrell were publishing through a company called Ferrell House, weren't they? A publisher called Ferrell House. Adam Parfrey runs that. And I tell some of that story that basically, jumping if my memory is incorrect, Dr. Wood, that you'd essentially got this book, you planned this book, you pretty much knew what you wanted in it. You got the images.
It was rough around the edges. Might have been too many images or whatever. And I would listen to some feedback from him or some criticism, and he wanted me to take out like the Hutchison chapter, like and he wanted to take out a whole bunch of images, and And it became worse and worse and worse, didn't it? And it started off being something, the initial proposal... But I trusted him, and he had me eating out his hand.
Going back a little step, the initial proposal, I think, was for a 330-page book or a 300-page book with colour inserts in the middle.
No, we hadn't discussed that.
Oh, was that not? Oh, maybe
it
I
wasn't discussed. That turned into it later.
Ah, okay. So, okay. So that wasn't discussed initially, but at some point you made a sort of rough outline that it was going to be a 300 or odd page book with colour photos. Is that right?
Well, it was going to be. It had to be colour photos. I said that from the start, and okay, that was going to be the case. And I think 240 pages or something was talked about, or that's what they had come back to say. No, I need to do it in one book. If you break it up, you know, if I wanted to make money, I'd break each chapter. Each chapter makes the case by itself. But then you'd have, well, she didn't talk about this, she didn't talk about that, so I wanted the whole story in one volume. And the reason why it's hardback is for structural
integrity.
Yeah, yeah, a paperback would fall apart.
Yeah, yeah.
So being a hardback book and it's good quality, so for one thing, and Parfrey refused to publish that. He wanted to do it in black and white on newsprint paper. And
so basically, yeah, it was going to be inadequate, totally inadequate. The format they eventually said that you had to use to get it published by them was going to be no good.
And chop out this chapter and take
chop
out
everything
that
out. So they basically were trying to water it down, dilute it, make it look trashy, cheap, and would have next to no impact. But anyone who's picked up the Where Did the Towers Go book will know that it's what an impact it has.
But in Farrell's behalf, if you're into making money, you want to publish a cheap book and make money off it.
And the reason, yeah, absolutely. And the reason why I was keen to get this on record was because of what he's been doing quite recently. A couple of months ago, he did an interview where he's talking about his work. He comes home from work. He says he worked in a casino, and he came home. He had a friend staying with him, and the news was on. He was just about to go to bed.
I'm hearing from the living room, oh my God, over and over again. And so I finally got up, put on my bathrobe, and came into the living room and said, what in the name of sense is going on? He pointed to the television screen, and I looked, and just as I looked, you know, the North Tower of the World Trade Center was on fire. And just as I looked, the second tower was struck, the South Tower was struck. And immediately I thought, you know, we're under attack. So I stayed up and watched the towers come down. And I began to notice two things. Number one, the meme was already being put out by the what I like to call the lamestream media, that, you know, was there a possibility that the fires could so weaken the structures that they'd come down? And of course, I thought that's nonsense, you know, because for one thing, you know, you were looking at black smoke coming out of them. The fires were, in other words, they were cool fires. They weren't oxygen-rich fires. So I thought immediately, well, that's nonsense. So there's something going on here. And then the towers came down, and I deliberately made myself count. You know, I used my hands to kind of physically count. And I thought, gee, that's near free fall speed. So this is not a conventional collapse. This is some sort of controlled demolition. And the way it looked to me, Tim, literally kind of watching the towers kind of be peeled like a banana, I thought this is not a conventional controlled demolition. There may be some sort of exotic technology at work here.
Here's Tower 1 coming apart, and it peels away like peeling a banana, and left with these little spires sticking up. That's about 700 feet tall. It's got to be pretty strong to be standing unsupported that tall. The story's changed over time. I never heard about the casino before.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think he said, yeah, that's what he said, and so he then says he's watching the events on TV with his friend there, and he says he's watching the events happen in New York and the tower's being destroyed, and this is on the day. You know, this is not after the events, and he said he saw the buildings peeling like a banana. You know? Yeah,
all the various statements from my book. He had my manuscript.
Exactly, so he had that manuscript. And so he was basically he was saying that he was using the language that you've used, and that even then in that context he wasn't being quite accurate, because you actually specifically, correct me if I'm wrong, described the spire, the so-called spire.
There's a banana peeling image. It looks like, yeah, peeling banana.
And that's one of the key pieces of evidence which shows that the steel was turning to dust. And if
Because if you see it abruptly peeling off, a piece coming off from it, you're not seeing the thing disintegrating. It's still crisp around
Yeah,
that one piece
yeah,
that's still standing. There's no haze of dust around it.
So you know, that's one of the key things. And you know, the people that are not familiar, as you said, the buildings, they did not burn up, they did not slam to the ground,
They mostly
turned to dust in midair. That's what happened to the towers. If you want to get it down to a compact, succinct description, that's it basically.
And actually, that statement was in the Supreme Court thing. That's
right. Great.
Because you only have so many words, and that.
Yeah,
that
and that's it. You put that into a court document
Yeah.
because you knew you could prove that's what happened.
Yep. No question.
And that's the whole point. That's why we're so firm on this, and we don't talk about theories. We don't want to talk about theories.
You don't take a court case based on theories or hypotheticals.
No. But then other people, what we've noticed as well, number of times, quite a few well-meaning people approach you. Sometimes they approach me and say, "Oh, I've got this theory that I want to add on to Judy Wood's theory," you know, and they're perfectly free to do that if they wish. We can't stop them doing that. It's, you know, free speech everywhere and all of that. But it's often very unhelpful to do that, to add speculation to something it isn't speculative, because then people then
think it's all speculative.
Correct. So that's why, you know, if somebody writes to me with that sort of attitude, I can give them short shrift, to use an expression. I say, look, this isn't a theory. This is the evidence. And as you said, you know what you know.
Know what it is that you know that you know that you know, and know that you don't know anything. The rest.
Don't confuse the two.
Right, and don't fill in the gap.
And don't try and fill in the gaps. So you've said that many times, and it still applies. And what we were saying earlier on about Where Did the Towers Go, as the book, it's a course in critical thinking as much as being a book about 9/11.
To show that discipline and sort of teach that discipline, because that is something that is so lost in our culture. People think that really confuse guesses and theories and hypotheticals with facts. And to really gain some discipline in separating those things, because once you separate those things and know what it is that you know, and not fill in that other, if you start filling in things with guesswork, you're biasing your observations.
Right.
Like, for example, why I talked about fumes. That's a generic term. If you say smoke, you're already assuming fire is the source.
And there's many examples of that in the book. So, and it's a good, often, as you said, I think, if you read the book, when you finish reading
front
it, read
to the back.
Through. So you read it in order, front to back, straight through. Don't skip any parts. Don't skip to the middle.
Don't go quote mining.
Don't go quote mining. Don't go picture browsing. You know, study it all, and then when you've studied it all, go back to the beginning and study it again.
Yep.
You know,
3 times is usually the the popular number of times, because first time through you sort of get the picture. Second time through, you see the details, like the various footnotes and
yes, indeed,
things like that quoted things from other sources. And then third time, it's solidified.
It's truly an amazing compendium as well, and you know, so people should try and beg, steal, or borrow a copy and work through it, you know, as best they can. Some people say there's technical parts, but there are many non-technical parts as well.
You can step around the equations. The equations are there for who want equations.
Yeah, for people that understand that and, you know, feel comfortable dealing with that. Feel the need for them, indeed. So essentially the book was published in late.
Well, it was ready in 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
And then when Farrell went weird, I said, okay, I got to figure out how to do this on my own, contacted somebody else. But what I'd like to say about another thing about the book, and you've helped me verbalize, that my teaching style is to get the reader to think. Why I call it a course in critical thinking, to get the reader to process the information. Don't spoon feed them, but you ask them enough questions and you give them the data to look at, and they can figure it out. So my book covers what happened as well as how it happened. That's
right. So the how is there, but it's done in a way which is sort of kind of subtle and not spoon feeding you. So you show the how in the form of things like, for example, tornadoes.
The direct evidence, and then I show parallel evidence.
Yeah. So, and then you can see on one side one set of evidence, and the other side the other set of evidence, and anybody.
And all of it is evidence.
Exactly. So it's no theories. You know, we've said that many times. The irrefutable film that Adam Dwyer so marvelously made a couple of years ago, which has I think turned a few heads. I think it was pretty successful in what he set out to do in that film.
He was an engineer. He just
He
happened
was,
upon
yeah,
the book and
yeah.
went, whoa.
And he did a very good job because he edited all the clips down. It took him over a year, I think, to make that film. So again, and this has been the theme, that people that have come to this information and taken it forward. We don't have a group, do we? We don't run architects and engineers. We don't run a group or anything particularly. And that brings me on to another thing I wanted to mention, which will bring us on to the final part of this. We don't really run a group. We don't take in $1 million in 18 months of funds like architects and engineers do and go on 30-day world tours. If somebody is sincere and wants us to do a talk, either you or me, and we'll pay our expenses, you know, basically, that's all we need, you know. The problem then is the getting people to come to those events, the advertising and the promotion, and you know, when you book an event that's in a strange town and you've never booked an event before, it's often difficult to get people to come to those events.
Especially if it doesn't have a slick website
and you don't have a slick website and so forth, you know. But as far as we're concerned, the evidence is all there on our websites. Maybe like my website, it's okay, it's not that well organised. But we've both done books. If you want all the evidence, get the book. My book is free to download. Your book can be had for $25 plus shipping, you know, depending on where you are in the world.
£25.
Yeah, £25, sorry, and it's
like
$40, isn't it? Including shipping, I think, isn't it?
Some of the shipping's in addition to that.
Yeah, sometimes, but anyway.
That is at cost.
Yeah, it's basically cost price, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you look at it, you know, can you go to a copy center and get 500 pages of
glossy
color prints?
Hardback. Yeah, absolutely,
you know,
absolutely.
It's 540 pages.
540 pages. So, so the book, you know, those books are there. People can read them. We've done videos. It's all on the web.
And none of it has ever been refuted.
No. And we, you know, again, if there are mistakes, we want to hear about them. I certainly do, and people I've made mistakes, and those have been corrected as best I can. But going on from there, then going back to, for example, we talked about having a group. Well, you know, you don't use Facebook, but there is there are actually 3 or 4 Facebook groups. The one that I administer has over 5,000 members, but to me that's almost a meaningless figure because there are only probably about 10 or 15 people that are active posters, and I could go down the list and name those, you know. We just, that group is specifically focused around where did the towers go and the research you put together and the significance of that. We don't talk about the latest 9/11 document release, about these 28 pages of documents that, you know, we're not interested in that. You know, we're interested in the importance of the evidence which shows you that free energy technology exists.
I'd like to put it in other terms is what happened, my book's about evidence of what happened.
Yes.
And the evidence of what happened is evidence that a technology exists that can do what was done. But that technology doesn't have to do what was done. It can do good things. And that provide free energy.
That's essentially our main motivation, isn't it? To show people that out of this, you know, horrible set of events, horrible on so many levels, that there is a light at, you know, a light that can come out of that, hopefully, to change
Silver
the world.
lining of the great cloud.
And you know, obviously you've written about Nikola Tesla in your book, and other people such as John Hutchison.
And Tesla is afraid to bring this out for fear it would be used for evil instead of good. Well, we don't have that fear anymore.
We don't have that fear anymore.
Then they're done that.
Because they've already done it. And so really then, that's the goal, isn't it? To reveal that, and that, of course, if people watch the Irrefutable film, that's what the theme that Adam so masterfully, exposed in that film. Some people don't like the loud music, but that's okay. Turn the music down. Made. Yeah, that's just how it was made. And Adam did it himself. And what I wanted to say earlier on is that that's been the theme. That people are looking at your book or your website, your interviews or whatever, and the people that do it well say, "Yeah, I've got to do something with this." And then they'll say, "Look, I've done this. What do you think?" And they'll make something and then give us the opportunity to give them criticism on it. And the honest people will say, "Oh, you don't like that? Oh, sorry, I'll change it. Let me fix it for you." And the ones that are not honest won't change it, or will just say, "Oh, you're just being awkward. You know, you don't really care about what people, you know,
they put
do
space
for you."
beams in it.
Yeah, or they'll put some spin on it of their own spin.
Yeah.
And then
and claim it's mine.
Any advice that we want to give them to fix it or make it more true to what the actual evidence shows you, they reject that. So I've found there are two types of people that come forwards in this. So that's a theme that's come out.
Also, that the evidence of what happened, the evidence of how it happened, is in the book. And many like to say, oh, she didn't think of this gizmo or that gizmo or this gizmo, because they want to play spin the dial and name that weapon. And that takes people away from what happened. The evidence is irrefutable. You can't argue with the evidence. You can argue with names of gizmos, but you can't argue with the evidence. Absolutely,
yeah, and you can have all these debates about HARP or whatever it is, and that I wrote an article about that many years ago.
Like anything that can do what was done is classified technology.
Yeah. So we as ordinary people don't have access to that, and we're no different. We've had various people contacting us claiming to know certain things.
But then why are they talking about it?
Yeah.
If they have a security clearance.
Exactly. I mean, those that know don't talk, and those that talk don't know.
Bingo.
That's the phrase that I've heard said many times, and that seems to be the
something else of interest to point out is since my book has come out, there's been quite a few people contacting me, sometimes quietly saying, "You're spot on."
Yeah, and this is people that have seen the events themselves, haven't they? And
yeah, or who know of this type of work.
Yeah. So, but really, that's about as far as we can go, because they themselves are under threat. Because this group, whoever it is, this group is, as I've said, they have absolute power. Yep. They have absolute power, and if you go by the saying that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, then my logic would be they are absolutely corrupt. And that has been our experience, hasn't it, with people like Fetzer and Jones? I'd say they're absolutely corrupt.
No moral compass left.
No moral compass left, and that's what I would say. Going back to the Facebook group, I did say that I was going to come and visit you, and we were going to have this conversation, and so I did have a few questions, some of which I was able to go through with you. I'll see how this edits through. And I've got a question here from Matteo, two questions actually. And he's written, were the powder samples analysed, and if so, what emerged? That's the first question. I think that's easy to answer. We don't go into long explanations, because you do talk about the powder samples in your book, don't you? Or the dust samples. Yeah.
Yep, they're in the book.
So again, if you want to know about the dust samples, that's in the book.
And whether there are bias samples or not bias samples. And
you cover all of that, don't you? Yeah. So that's in the book. Many people repeatedly asked what the proof of powder steel. What is the answer? Well, we know that what the answer to that is. Many answers to it. They're all in the book, but the videos show the actual steel turning to dust with the.
It doesn't go thud in the ground. It's not left in the ground below.
Not left on the ground.
It's effervescing on the way down.
The seismic evidence shows all of the building dust turned to dust. Just about all of it. So that means that the steel must have turned to dust as well, because the steel was part of the building.
Yeah, you have 100,000 tons of steel, and you have like a jackhammer hitting, on the ground. So that's
all in the videos as well as the book. Perhaps in some ways clearer in the videos, because you can actually see it happening, but you need the evidence in the book.
Like that Barbara Crowley video.
Yes.
With Building 7 dropping behind her when she's being interviewed, and the crowd's going, oh! And what happened? She has no idea that a building just dropped behind her.
That's right. And then another question from Torley. Could the system of directed energy used on 9/11 be as simple as a scrapyard electromagnet? A switch is thrown, and this cancels the electronic attractions between atoms.
It's not quite that simple. But what I mean by directed energy is instructed energy. Energy is directed or instructed to do something differently than it normally does. And the examples of, parallel evidence of how that is done is in John Hutchison's work. It's in tornadoes. It's in a variety of hurricanes. There's a variety of examples we see even in nature. So it's not something that has never happened before.
Right. And again, it isn't a simple process. If it was, we would be able to reproduce it
real easily.
Yeah, really easily. But again, look at cold fusion research. We have had some developments with this chap we were speaking to the other day, which will hopefully become clear in the fullness of time. In other words, I think there's some developments, just as we're near the time of recording this, that are making the cold fusion link even stronger than it already was, I think.
Or is it coming up with just validating the evidence?
Validating the evidence, exactly.
And just doing more parallel experiments, providing more parallel evidence.
Exactly. And next question is, so that was from Torley. This one is from...
I'd like to also add about the dust samples. It's even in my book, as well as what I presented in 2007 at Philosopher Professors Conference.
Absolutely. And this one's from Jesse Deladio. How has investigating 9/11 changed Dr. Wood's worldview paradigm? So how has it changed your
I thought
worldview?
more people were honest, or honest with themselves. And I didn't realize how many people don't see what's in front of them.
It's been a real...
believe what they're told instead of seeing what's in front of them, like my colleagues.
So, I mean, I think, we've talked about this a bit, haven't we? Well, we've talked about this a lot, haven't we? How it's changed our worldview. And you said with your colleagues, that was a big wake-up thing, wasn't it?
It was the scariest day of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like the invasion of the body snatchers.
Yeah.
Because these are honest people, but they couldn't get outside of what they're being told. They just were following in line, like the Ash conformity experiment shows.
Yeah. And it is so difficult for people to take on board the enormity of this, and they just sometimes completely shut down. Because it
destroys their worldview.
Yeah, it completely destroys it.
You have to be able to respect evidence and value looking at evidence and seeing what the evidence says, rather than eeny, meeny, miny, moe, and spin the dial on these answers, predetermined answers like multiple choice questions.
Yeah. And another question, Dr. Wood has described 9/11 as an attack on human consciousness. For myself, 9/11 has been an expansion of consciousness which led me to seek out the truth. Can Dr. Wood extrapolate on the idea that while 9/11 has been damaging to human consciousness, it has also had the opposite effect on others?
Like we were just discussing, that I had no idea that most other people don't see evidence and see what's really there. Instead, they're pre-programmed to eeny, meeny, miny, moe. It's got to be one of these three things. And they don't look at what the evidence is saying. They look at what the choices are for the answer, like any multiple choice test. I guarantee you, multiple choice tests aren't going to have this answer on them.
Absolutely.
And you have to be able to see that, and very few people can.
So that's been my experience as well. So we've had very negative attacks by people, and then some people have said that it's changed their life for the better, and it's made them so much more aware of how the world really is, and they value that. Some people don't value it and they're afraid of it, but others have the opposite reaction. It liberates their thinking, and they start to think in new ways. And I've certainly said that this opens up a whole set of possibilities and new horizons.
Know what it is that you know that you know that you know.
Exactly.
Not what other people tell you. You're supposed to know, or what they think you should know.
And then Jesse adds his thanks for what you've done.
Well,
producing this.
Thank him for thinking.
Absolutely.
Because that's what we need, more people who can think.
And then another question from Trev, which you looked at earlier on. How are you coping with all the flack that you get from both the mainstream media and the trolls on the internet?
The truth is the truth.
We just get on with it, don't we?
It doesn't matter what people think.
No.
That's a reflection on them, not on me.
And privately we have conversations how we get fed up of all the same things being said over and over again, and we've done to death in articles I've written, things that you've said on the radio.
Like, how can people be so weird to follow into the same rut?
But as you just said a minute ago, none of that changes what happened. We know what happened, and other people can know what happened if they want to.
Most of the building turned to dust.
Yep.
People insulting me doesn't change that.
No. We'll have days where we feel fed up and we just don't want to do anything, but the next day you think, I'm over that now.
You're all right. You just got to vent it and then you move on.
Exactly, vent it and move on, and you keep going.
But it does become really surprising how the leaders of the PSYOPs, or some of the leaders of the PSYOPs, have such easy control over people, can easily divert them.
Absolutely.
That I wouldn't have guessed.
Yeah. Next question comes from Jonathan. There's a whole bit of a list here. Is there any evidence of advanced technology at other 9/11 sites? So we mentioned this earlier. More generally, how much have you looked at into the incidents at Pentagon, Shanksville, and any information about these elements of the attack which are not being talked about by the mainstream 9/11 truth movement. In other words, they're not talking about what happened to the World Trade Center, not really. So are there things that you're aware of about the Pentagon, for example, that you've seen, not talked about elsewhere?
Well, the Pentagon in Shanksville, there is the same evidence if you look, but there's not nearly as much evidence, and there's very minute, tiny, detailed evidence galore at the World Trade Center. And you don't need to study 50 different things if you study one thing in depth. And if you know what happened at the World Trade Center, you're done.
That's it. That's what I say to people. You've got so much video evidence, so much witness testimony.
Yeah. You don't need to water it down and divert people away from it.
And the only thing I'd add to that is that I think it is in your book too. You've got one or two pictures of the toasted cars at the Pentagon, right? Am I right? So people can go and look at those, and that's on your website too.
But once you study what happened at the World Trade Center, then you look at the Pentagon site and you go, oh my gosh, it is the same thing.
Okay. And he asks about, is there any new information since publishing the book about the destruction of the towers that has come to light since you've written your book, in terms of advanced technology being used? Do we have any new information about that? Well, I suppose I'd answer that, not that it was addressed to me, but we've talked about the link to cold fusion. I think there's a few bits and pieces that have come to light that's strengthened that.
Well, it's just strengthened it, but I have that connection in there, like Mizuno's information and I've forgotten his name from Texas A&M.
John Bockris.
Bockris.
Yeah, he's sadly no longer with us.
Yeah, sadly, but he has read my book.
Absolutely, yes.
That was a beautiful treasure.
And what are your plans for the future? I get asked that a lot. What sort of things? I could get asked a lot. What are you working on now? Are you working on anything? I know the answer to that, of course.
Yeah, my book is about independent thinking and about critical thinking. And if somebody really goes through it carefully and can think on their own and don't need spoon feeding, I guess I wonder when somebody asks me that, if they're looking for, okay, I'm a blank slate, write the story on my mind because I can't think anymore.
And
I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound so harsh.
I know. This is the problem.
I mean, just sort of exaggerating it a bit, but a lot of people look for, like, well, what does the news say? What does this say? What does that say? What do you think is what I want people to end up with? Because if you constantly look for what other people say or do, you're vulnerable to whatever the news media wants to railroad down your throat.
Absolutely, and
or anybody else, or an alternative.
I think one of the things that comes up is you've done this book, and then people attempt to say, when's the next book coming out? And really, this book isn't like that. It's not meant to be part of a series, particularly, is it?
Right.
I know that you had mentioned you were thinking of doing another book, but
there's just more data of the same, but this covers it.
Yeah.
So and more of the other would water down this, would distract away from it.
So there's reasons maybe for looking at perhaps doing another book, but that's not. This book wasn't done like any other book, was it?
Like a halfway job. It wasn't a halfway job.
No. And it was meant to be something which would change everyone's thinking once they'd seen it and change their. So how do you do that with another book? How's that going to? Once you know that this technology exists, how is another book going to change that?
Perfect question.
That's
it, right on target.
So that then again, you don't need a second book really.
It's not new information. It's just more information that I have.
Yeah.
Stuff that I took out of this book that was. It was like, just too much of the same thing. Like, that was hard for the toasted cars. I had a toasted car for every event, every occasion. And thinning down to just certain ones, that was tough to choose. That was the toughest job of all.
Yeah.
Now I've got tons more of that, tons more of, the other portions, but this tells the story.
Absolutely. And I think to sort of try and close really, we are ordinary people, really. We have our own lives. We have things that we like to do in our own time. We're volunteers in this, really. We're not elected. We're not given money to write books or do investigations.
It's not something we become millionaires over.
Yeah, and I mean, I like to go out for walks. I post stuff on Facebook. You like. I mean, I know you've become a big chicken fan here, haven't you, over the last couple of years?
In my garden.
In your garden, you do your garden. And you do some volunteer work, don't you, and stuff. So people will know you for that as well in your local area. So we've
There
got.
was a volunteer, I mean, in my volunteer thing, there's somebody I ran into that, I forget how we got started talking, and she said, I need to read your book.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to talking with this person after they finish.
You know, we've essentially done what I think that you probably maybe feel the same as I do. We've done what we can do with this, really. With the things as things are currently, we don't feel we can do. I don't feel I can do much more than I've done. I don't know about you.
You can't improve on it.
No, no.
And as we were saying, nobody has refuted. It's been now like 10 years, this information.
And my architects and engineers are still saying, oh, we need a new investigation. And as we've said, who's going to do it?
Oh, well, what's a new investigation?
Yeah,
This wasn't.
That's the new investigation.
It's the most comprehensive
But even if you want to
out there.
take what's in Where Did the Towers Go, let's just say in a hypothetical situation, and put it into a government document of some kind, say they just wanted to literally, you know, tear the book out and stick it into a government, you know,
they
folder.
wouldn't want to do that.
No,
That's exposing
no.
too much.
Yeah, of course. And so it's not going to happen, is it?
It's going to be swept under the carpet. But if somebody wants a new investigation, read the book.
Read the book, pay the $40, and away you go. You don't need to
Or you can get it from the library.
Yeah, or get it from a library.
Loan.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a good way to do it.
So I think we didn't want to make this too long, did we? And I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
We've covered a lot of different things, but the important thing is once you go through the book, then you realize your eyes should be open and you start seeing the whole world differently.
And you can look at a whole range of different topics with different analytical skills, which you've then gained.
And you quit watching TVs, another thing.
Yes, yes, you do.
What was it that Richard Hall says?
Throw your TV out of the window.
Yeah.
Throw your TV out of the window.
Yeah. That's a good thing, because everything about it is just, if I'm at somebody's house and happen to see it, it's so strange.
Yeah. So I think we'll probably just close by thanking our hosts here, who've been absolutely wonderful.
Well, thanking Andrew for coming here for this event.
Oh yeah, I mean it was my great pleasure, of course, to see the eclipse and spend some time. So I hope this is recorded properly. It'd be a shame if it hasn't. Yeah. And we shall just say thank you to all the people that support us in what we do by giving out leaflets, DVDs, telling friends, sharing the information.
And thinking honestly.
And thinking for themselves. That's all we want them to do. They don't need to thank us. It's nice when they do, but we're getting on with our lives. We suggest you get on with yours.
Oh, how to change the world. That's an important thing to think about. Like, what do we do to change the world? What we need is more honest thinking.
Yes.
If all of us are honest, always be truthful in everything you do, that will change the world.